Hi, my name is Martha Sullivan. I am the artist who has put together the show called Confluence for the 2021 NCECA happening in Cincinnati. I'm really excited to show at the Elusive Cow Cafe in Bellevue, Kentucky. And if you're available in March or April, I hope that you'll stop by and check it out. I am a professor of practice in industrial design at the School of Architecture and Design at Virginia Tech. This is just what the outside of our building looks like. I just wanted to give you a little context of my background. So like I said, I teach industrial design, so a lot of my students are interested in products, services, and systems, some analog and some digital. Mostly, my passion is ceramics. So I also run the ceramics program at the school. And these are just a few of my students in the studio getting ready to make one-piece molds for our empty bowls class. Our studio gets filled every year with empty bowls. And I showed this just because it's one of our more popular classes. But as you can see, the students make a variety of forms and shapes, and it's a pretty exciting place to work. As part of my work at Virginia Tech, I've been able to travel with students, and this is from one of my first study abroad trips in China. I've also taken students to Europe and to South America, and I'm talking about this today because these trips are part of the streams that come together for Confluence. All the places that I've been, all the things that I've seen, and then how does that transfer into the imagery that I want to portray in my own pots, the story that I want to tell. So part of this exhibit is in celebration of all of these travels and all of the things that not just I've learned, but also that these students have learned. Whenever I go on these trips, one of my favorite things to do is photography. So part of this exhibit really is about capturing those moments. So you'll notice in my documents and in my videos, I've tried to share those trips in different ways. And so photography is also a part of this exhibit. The work itself has happened in the last calendar year since the beginning of the pandemic. And in March, when the world started to close, so did Virginia Tech. My students were sent home at spring break thinking they were in school and never came back. And so my hands-on class turned to completely online. And so this is just an image of what it was like inside of my dining room every Tuesday and Thursday as I was setting up for class, setting up the Zoom, setting up my demos, setting up a screen so I could see their work too. And it was in this practice and this solitude that new work was born for me. I think it's exciting time for me because I feel like I'm in a big transition. I have a lot going on. During the pandemic, you can see my beautiful daughter, Dorothy, and the pots I've been working on and my computer out for us to work together, and even just a little bit of math on the table. So balancing all of these things can be challenging, as I'm sure many of you know. And I think when I look at this work, I think about how hard times are, but then I get really excited because I had this opportunity to bring together a lot of different ideas that I'd been rattling around in my head and that I've been working on in my pots for years and years. And I feel like it finally came together in this time. And so for as hard as it was, I'm extremely grateful. This is what my studio looks like. So as I left Virginia Tech campus and stayed mostly at home, I reactivated my basement studio, and it was actually pretty exciting to kind of get back down there and make new work after being in the office for so long. This is kind of what my work looked like before the pandemic. So these are just a few shots from the studio, maybe one day after I was pulling things out of the kiln. So I make functional pottery. These happen to be slip cast, and I've been experimenting for the last 5 or 6 years with screen printing. So I'm screen printing underglaze and then transferring those images to the surface of the pots. And I happen to be a fan of bicycles and bicycle riding. And so, as you can imagine, that's where the idea for the gears comes. There's just a few kitchen tools, little kitchen items. It was inspired by like a 1950s fabric, I think. My neighborhood houses. This is actually my memory of Cincinnati. So I grew up in Cincinnati. It was one of the reasons I really wanted to show during this particular NCECA, because so much of this exhibition is about memory. And so what I'm interested in this is these houses in Cincinnati. I have very strong memories of the neighborhood I lived in and very strong memories of the architecture in downtown Cincinnati and around the different areas and hills of Cincinnati. And so, yeah, that's where the screen print was inspired from. So a few more houses. And as you can see, I'm not interested. I first was really tight about how the patterns went on, and now some of these I'm rolling in foam that have ink on them, and so it's okay that the images overlap for me. But mostly this is like the screen printing covering the whole surface. So while I was at home, what happened was I had only the materials that the students could use. So I was allowed to go to school just long enough to pick up a couple bags of clay and some slip, because I do both plastic clay and liquid clay in class. And so I just happened to combine them based on a recent trip that I had taken to Costa Rica, where they were using colored slips on the outside of a clay, really heavy and volcanic ash. So it was really dark and gritty, and then they were putting these really brilliant colored slips on the outside and then carving through them. And so I thought it would be fun. I just started playing around with that, and I realized that the lines were really striking, and maybe, these patterns weren't right for me, a little bit loose compared to what I like the graphic style of the screen prints I'm doing right now. But still, there was something there. And what I realized is that I could start to combine these things. So before, when I was wrapping all of my pots, the whole surface, and having to make things flat and really think about like how I was gonna get those images transferred onto the surface, I started realizing that I could free myself from trying to cover the whole surface by dealing with imagery more directly. And so it actually, I think it gives the patterns that I'm using a little bit more depth, where they felt really one-dimensional on my pots before. Like you could see the clay, you could see the layer of the image, and then you could see the glaze on top of it. And here, using the screen print to get a color block and then actually defining that shape with the carving was a pretty big transformation for me. And so here you can just see me, I'm interested in this koi. I've spent a lot of time in China, and that is where this pink plum blossom comes from, and the blue auspicious clouds. So this is my love of places that I've been that's coming through on my pots. So I'm practicing the different shapes, kind of sketching them out. How big can they be? How much detail can I get? And then, making sure they fit on my pots before I commit to making them. So these moon pots and these flower pots also came from this time period, just from having to be in class. We were supposed to be talking about drape molds. So I started demonstrating them at home. And then once I got through those first two bowls that you saw that were carved, I started assembling them. I was trying to talk to the students about what you could do with drape molds as a tool instead of as a end point. And that's how the moon pots came about. And also you can see over here in the corner, so these are two bowls that have been put together in the moon pots, right? They have a slab that connects them, and then in the far corner, and then what happens with these flower pots is that it's just two smaller drapes put together and then feet attached to the bottom. So here you can kind of see the tools that I'm using to do this. So I'm using a red stoneware clay, and then I'm painting a white slip on top of it. And I've used underglazes and screen printed them on paper. And then I'm trimming them out into particular shapes. So I used to wrap this plum blossom uh, pattern all the way around the pots. And now I kind of trim out just a little bit that would look like just enough blossoms that might be on the end of a single branch. And then I can highlight those flowers. These flowers really used to fade into the background so much. They just never had the definition and the pop that you see in a plum blossom in the middle of winter when there's not a speck of color around. But then, and so, yeah, they're getting trimmed out. I'm wetting that paper, putting it on the surface and rubbing it in like a temporary tattoo. So here you can kind of see that setup. So I have screens, I'm using underglazes, printing big sheets of these patterns, letting them dry a little bit, and then trimming them out. You can see on some of the bowls in the background that, you know, I've tried putting these like right on the surface, not use the carving. That's a white slip by itself cast into a form and then drawing black around it. That's okay, it's just not exactly the same as the carving onto the red clay. The black lines have a tendency to move and blur, and so it complicates things. So this is just a few images, again, of just kind of working out these patterns. So this was really joyful for me, playing and sketching and drawing and figuring out proportions and details, and they get more detailed as I go along, and the prints get richer. And then I began to transfer them across forms, so hand-built forms and thrown forms. And I call this the giving tree. Here you can kind of see all my patterns working out. So I have, I call something the tartan koi. So I made a tartan pattern, and that's the koi fish. There's the moons and blossoms and the giving tree, and then eventually the mindful dragon. That's the last one to come out at this time. So this is all happening in spring of 2020. Again, just a process shot, you know, starting with the leather hard pot, painting on the white slip, kind of trimming out the shapes that I want, transferring them onto the white slip, and then when they dry, giving them a carve. And this is one of my more recent ones where I'm starting to use multiple colors of the print. So in the beginning, I was only using like a single print, and with the sun, I started to think, oh, maybe I can layer the colors together and get something different. So here you can just see me planning them out. And I thought it, because I talk so much about process to my students, and so much of this exhibit is basically our conversation through the pandemic. How do we make work? How do we stay focused? How do we get creative? And then, you know, what happens to our pots because of that exploration. So that's why I'm kind of sharing with you the process and not just the end products. But I can't say enough that it was my extreme pleasure to fill my studio during this time, trying to figure out how this new surface would work for me. So these are some of the finished pots. I thought I'd show you that beautiful plum blossom that I was talking about, that I've enjoyed so much in the springtime in China, and how that translated to my pots. These are the first round of moon vases that I fired. And then the auspicious clouds across different forms. The tartan koi. The mindful dragon. Stacks of set. So like I said, I'm mostly a functional potter. Really enjoy table settings. Really enjoy having people use these kinds of objects in their homes every day. Something just really sweet about a handmade pot early in the morning with a hot cup of tea or coffee, or maybe on a cold afternoon with a bowl of soup. It's a really nice time to reach out to people in a way, because you're living with them. Your objects are living with them. So this is the second round of moon pots. Each time the pattern changes just a little bit, trying out some points on the auspicious clouds. I dropped that pretty quickly, even though there's, you know, some traditional edge to it. These are those little pods made out of 2 sides of the same drape mold, and the top is painted white and then carved through. A small set of jars with the plum blossom, auspicious clouds, the tartan koi, and all the little dipping dishes that you saw in process. And this last round of work, I've really been focusing on plates. So this is the first of the plum blossoms. I'm a little bit concerned about the slip on the edges and whether or not that'll ever separate from the red clay, easier to chip. So I started to change the rims. So this is the last set of work to come out for this show, is a series of plates. The plum blossom, the auspicious cloud, the giving tree, the tartan koi, and the sun, the most recent. And this is where life is now. So now we're in 2021. We're just weeks away from NCECA when I'm recording this. I'm very excited. I'm excited that you're listening in. This is what ceramics looks like now. Cameras everywhere, hoping to catch the students' attention, talking to them from far away, but still really excited to see their work. Their meeting with them every day probably definitely contributed to my own success this last year. I'm really grateful for them. Pottery has always been a great companion. I hope you find that to be true. And I really appreciate you listening today and visiting my space. I hope you enjoy the show, Confluence. And again, you can see it at the Elusive Cow Cafe in Bellevue, Kentucky this spring. Thanks.